The weight of waiting. The Thornton homestead sat in a pocket of land where the prairie rolled gently downward, as if the earth itself had decided to cradle this small claim against the harshness of the open plains. Sarah Mackenzie stood at the window of the spare bedroom, her left hand pressed against the frame for balance, watching the afternoon sun paint long shadows across the yard. 3 days had passed since she'd ridden through the night to save her father. 3 days since the world had tilted on its axis and shown her a version of herself she hadn't known existed. Behind her, Martha Thornton moved quietly about the room, folding clean linens with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd raised 4 children on the frontier. She was a sturdy woman in her late 40s, with hands that spoke of decades of hard work and eyes that missed little. "You should be resting," Martha said, not for the first time that day. "I've been resting for 3 days," Sarah replied, though she didn't turn from the window. Her ribs still ached with every breath, a reminder of the fall from her horse when exhaustion had finally claimed her. The doctor from Medicine Hat, summoned by Samuel before he'd left with James, had pronounced her fortunate. Bruised ribs, scraped palms, a twisted ankle. Nothing broken, nothing that wouldn't heal. "I should be home with Mother and Thomas." "Your mother has half the district keeping watch over that homestead," Martha said firmly. "The Johnsons, the Reids, the Peterson brothers, Daniel and Mary, they're safer than they've been since you arrived in Alberta. What they don't need is you riding back before you can sit a horse without wincing." Sarah finally turned, managing a weak smile. "You sound like Daniel." Something flickered across Martha's face. Amusement, perhaps, or no. "My son has good sense when it comes to most things. Though I'll admit, I've never seen him quite so focused as he's been these past days." Heat crept up Sarah's neck. She'd been aware of Daniel's presence constantly since she'd arrived. The way he'd carried her inside when Samuel brought her back. The way he'd sat outside her door that first night as if standing guard. The way his eyes found hers whenever they were in the same room. The way her heart responded to his attention, even through the fog of pain and worry. "He's been very kind," Sarah said carefully. Kind. Martha set down the linens and crossed to where Sarah stood. "Child, my Daniel looks at you the way his father looked at me 30 years ago, when I was a schoolteacher in Ontario, and he was a farmer's son with more dreams than money. That's not kindness. That's something altogether different." Sarah's breath caught. She felt it. Of course. The shift in how Daniel spoke to her. The weight of his concern. The way his hand had lingered on hers when he'd helped her to the table that morning. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Made it something she had to acknowledge. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted quietly. "Everything is so uncertain. We don't know if Father will reach Fort Walsh safely. We don't know what Blackwood will do. We don't even know if we'll still have our homestead when this is over. Life on the prairie is always uncertain," Martha said. "You wait for certainty. You'll wait forever. Sometimes you just have to trust that the ground will hold when you take the next step." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew both women's attention back to the window. A single rider approached from the east, moving at a steady pace that suggested neither urgency nor leisure. As the figure drew closer, Sarah recognized Peter Reid, one of the neighbors who'd answered her call for help. "Something's happened," Sarah said, already moving toward the door despite the protest from her ankle. Martha caught her arm. "Let me go first." "You stay here." But Sarah followed anyway, limping down the narrow stairs to the main room, where Daniel was already opening the door. He'd been repairing a harness at the kitchen table, but the leather strips lay forgotten as he stepped outside to meet Reid. Peter Reid was a lean man in his 30s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many seasons fighting the prairie sun. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd been born in the saddle, removing his hat as he approached. "Daniel, Mrs. Thornton." His eyes found Sarah in the doorway. "Miss Mackenzie, glad to see you on your feet." "What's happened?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. Reid glanced between them, weighing his words. "Blackwood's left Medicine Hat, pulled out yesterday morning with 2 of his men, not the ones who were watching your place, Miss Mackenzie. Different men. Harder looking, if you take my meaning." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Where did he go?" That's the question, isn't it? Reid shifted his weight. Frank Johnson rode into town this morning for supplies. Bartender at the Royal told him Blackwood settled all his accounts, packed up his office, and rode out before dawn. Didn't say where he was going, but he was headed northwest. Northwest, toward Fort Walsh, toward James and Samuel. Daniel's jaw tightened. How long does he have on them? Half a day, maybe less. Your father and James Mackenzie had a good head start, and they're traveling light. But Blackwood knows the territory, and if he's got men with him who know how to track— Reid didn't need to finish the sentence. We have to warn them, Sarah said, stepping fully outside despite the sharp pain in her ankle. If Blackwood catches them on the trail— You're not riding anywhere, Daniel said firmly, then seemed to catch himself. His voice softened. Sarah, you can barely walk, and someone needs to stay with the homesteads. If Blackwood's running, he might send men back to destroy evidence, to burn the mine entrance, anything to cover his tracks. Daniel's right, Reid said. I've got the Johnson boys watching the Mackenzie place, and Mary's staying with your mother. But we're spread thin. If Blackwood's desperate enough to run, he's desperate enough to do something stupid. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to demand a horse and ride out immediately, but her body betrayed her. Even standing here, her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, and the thought of mounting a horse made her ribs ache in anticipation. She'd pushed herself to the breaking point once already. She couldn't do it again, not without risking permanent injury. Then what do we do? She asked, hating the helplessness in her voice. Daniel exchanged a look with Reid, some unspoken communication passing between them. I'll ride out, Daniel said. I can make better time alone than Blackwood can with 2 men. If I push hard, I might catch up to Father and James before Blackwood does. That's a fool's errand, Martha said from the doorway, her voice sharp with maternal concern. You don't know the trail to Fort Walsh half as well as Samuel does, and you'll kill your horse trying to make up that distance. Then, what would you have me do? Daniel turned to face his mother, and Sarah saw the same determination in his eyes that she'd felt burning in her own chest 3 nights ago. Let Blackwood ambush them? Let him kill 2 good men because we sat here and did nothing? The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Sarah understood it intimately. The calculation of risks, the knowledge that action and inaction both carried terrible costs. There might be another way, Reid said slowly. The mounted police patrol between Medicine Hat and Fort Walsh regular-like. If we can intercept a patrol, tell them what's happening, they could ride ahead with authority behind them. Blackwood might be willing to ambush 2 homesteaders, but he won't take on the Northwest Mounted Police. That's a lot of ifs, Daniel said. If we find a patrol, if they believe us, if they reach Father and James in time. It's better odds than you riding alone into country you barely know, Reid countered. And I know the patrol routes. I can find them. Daniel looked at Sarah, and she saw the question in his eyes. He was asking her permission. She realized, not because he needed it, but because her family's fate hung in the balance, and he wanted her to have a voice in the decision. Sarah thought of her father, riding through the prairie with Samuel Thornton, carrying William Garrett's letter close to his chest. She thought of the silver mine, the Henderson family's flight, the 6 years Blackwood had kept his secret buried. She thought of Thomas, trying to be brave while his father rode toward danger. She thought of her mother, holding their homestead together through sheer force of will. And she thought of herself, the girl who dug through a sod wall and ridden through the night because waiting was not an option. Do it, she said. Find the patrol, and Daniel. She paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. Thank you for everything. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a softening around his eyes that made her breath catch. I'll bring them home safe, he said. I promise. Reid nodded. I'll get fresh horses. We leave in an hour. As the 2 men moved to prepare for the journey, Martha came to stand beside Sarah. They watched in silence as Daniel crossed the yard to the barn, his movements purposeful and sure. That boy's in love with you, Martha said quietly. You know that, don't you? Sarah did know. She'd known since the moment he'd looked at her across the Mackenzie homestead, surrounded by neighbors who'd come because she'd asked and said, You saved them all. She'd known since he'd carried her inside his family's home and stayed by her door like a sentinel. She'd known since this morning, when he'd helped her down the stairs, and she'd felt the careful tenderness in his hands. "I know," she whispered. "And how do you feel about that?" Sarah watched Daniel emerge from the barn leading his horse, watched him check the saddle with practiced efficiency, watched him pause to look back at the house, at her, before continuing his preparations. Her heart answered before her mind could catch up. "I feel like the ground might hold," she said. Martha smiled, a knowing expression that spoke of her own youth, her own leap of faith. "Then tell him so. When he comes back, tell him so." "If he comes back," Sarah said, the fear she'd been holding at bay finally breaking through. "He'll come back," Martha said firmly, "and so will your father. You Mackenzies are survivors. I saw that the moment Samuel told me about your ride. And my Daniel's got every reason in the world to make sure he keeps his promise to you." An hour later, Sarah stood in the yard, leaning heavily on a walking stick Martha had found for her, watching as Daniel and Peter Reid prepared to leave. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, she could see the dark smudge of smoke from the Mackenzie homestead, her mother keeping the fire going, keeping their claim alive. Daniel approached her, leading his horse. Up close, she could see the determination in his face, but also something else. Uncertainty, perhaps, or hope. "I'll find them," he said, "whatever it takes." "I know you will." Sarah reached out, her hand finding his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. "Daniel, She stopped, the words catching in her throat. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she'd been holding back because the world had been ending and there'd been no room for anything but survival. But now, with him about to ride away, possibly into danger, possibly toward Blackwood's desperation, she found she couldn't let him go without saying something. "When you come back," she said instead, "we need to talk. About everything." His eyes searched hers, and she saw hope kindle there, bright and fierce. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that very much." He squeezed her hand once more, then mounted his horse in one smooth motion. Reid was already in the saddle, waiting. The two men exchanged a nod, then turned their horses toward the trail. Sarah watched them ride away, two figures growing smaller against the vast expanse of prairie, carrying her hopes and fears with them. The sun continued its descent, and somewhere to the northwest, her father rode toward Fort Walsh, unaware that Cornelius Blackwood was hunting him. Martha came to stand beside her, one hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. "Now we wait," the older woman said. "I hate waiting," Sarah replied. "I know, child, but sometimes waiting is the hardest work of all." As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and purple, Sarah thought of all the threads that bound her life together: family, land, survival, and now something new, something fragile and precious that might grow into love if they could all just survive long enough to let it. The prairie wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust and the promise of rain that might never come. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, men rode toward collision, justice and vengeance, law and desperation, all converging on the trail to Fort Walsh. And Sarah Mackenzie, who had learned she was capable of extraordinary things, stood in a borrowed yard and did the hardest thing of all. She waited.